The room was quiet, too quiet for her liking. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, but steadies you. A clock ticked somewhere behind her, the sound slicing through the still air like a reminder that time was moving, even if she wasn't. She sat on the edge of the chair, hands folded, pretending not to notice how nervous she was. Across from her, he sat with that calm, unbothered posture therapists always have, one leg crossed over the other, pen in hand, eyes patient but piercing. "So," he said softly. "Why are you here?" She smiled, not out of warmth, but defense. "Because my husband thinks I need help." He nodded slowly. "And what do you think?" She looked at the floor. "I think he just wants to stop feeling guilty for not trying." The words hung in the air, heavier than she expected. He didn't write them down. He just watched her, not with pity, but with the kind of attention that feels rare. The kind that makes you realize how long it's been since someone actually listened. "Do you love him?" he asked. She hesitated. "That depends on what love is supposed to feel like." For the first time, his expression changed, barely, but enough. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, voice lower now. "And what does it feel like right now?" She looked up. Their eyes met for a moment too long, a second that shouldn't have lasted, a pause that carried something unsaid. "Empty," she whispered. "It feels empty." He nodded once, then wrote something down. The pen moved slowly, deliberately, like he was writing more than words, like he was writing her. When the session ended, she stood to leave, reaching for her bag. He walked her to the door, a small, meaningless gesture that somehow didn't feel meaningless at all. "Same time next week?" he asked. She nodded. But when she left his office, she realized she was already replaying every word he'd said, every silence, every look. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel numb. She felt something. It was raining the next time she came in. The sound tapped against the window like it was trying to remind her of something, maybe that she could still feel. He looked up from his notes as she walked in, the same calm expression on his face, the same stillness in the air. Only this time, she didn't sit right away. She stood by the bookshelf, reading the titles she'd already forgotten the first time. Books about grief, identity, healing, all things she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. "You came back," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "I wasn't planning to." He didn't answer, just waited, and that silence again, that impossible silence, filled the room. She finally sat down, crossing her legs, pretending to be composed. "Did something happen since our last session?" he asked. She laughed, but it came out small. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." He tilted his head. "You sound like someone who's tired of pretending." That line stayed in her mind longer than she wanted it to. He had this way of speaking, slow, careful, like every word was meant to land somewhere deep. For a moment, she looked at him and thought, he sees me. Not as a wife. Not as someone's responsibility. Just, her. She said quietly, "You make it sound like I can just stop pretending." He leaned back, hands folded. "You can. But it'll cost you something." She didn't ask what. She already knew. When she left that day, the rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. And she realized she was too. The third session felt different from the moment she walked in. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. He greeted her with the same calm tone, the same kind eyes, the same small notebook on the table. But this time, when she sat down, she didn't hide behind her posture. She just exhaled, a long, shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "How was your week?" he asked. She hesitated. Then smiled softly. "Quiet. Too quiet." He nodded, writing something in his notes, but she could tell his attention was still on her, that same focused stillness that made her both safe and restless. "I tried talking to my husband," she said. He didn't even look up from his phone. Her voice cracked a little, but she didn't care. He looked up. And how did that make you feel? She laughed through the tears that hadn't fallen yet. Invisible. Like maybe if I stopped existing, it would make things easier for everyone. He leaned forward, tone gentle but steady. You're not invisible here. The words hit her like warmth in cold air. Simple, but disarming. She looked at him, and for a moment, something shifted, not between therapist and patient, but between two people who understood loneliness too well. He didn't look away. Neither did she. It wasn't flirting. It wasn't wrong. It was something quieter, a kind of connection that felt almost sacred. When the session ended, she stood slower than usual. He didn't move to open the door this time. He just said, "Same time next week." But his voice was softer, almost hesitant. She nodded. And as she stepped out into the cold air, she caught herself smiling, not because she was happy, but because for 1 hour, she'd felt seen. Something had shifted, though neither of them said it aloud. She noticed it in the way she started dressing before each session, simple, but deliberate. A little more color. A little less armor. Her husband didn't notice. He never did. But the therapist did. When she walked into the office, his eyes flickered for just a second, enough for her to feel it. Enough to wonder if he felt it too. "Rough week?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Do you ask everyone that, or just me?" He didn't answer, just gave that same half-smile, the one that disarmed her more than any question could. They talked about guilt, about choices, about what people do to survive. And somewhere between his quiet words and her tired laughter, she realized she wasn't just talking to him anymore. She was talking for him. "Sometimes I think I just want someone to tell me it's okay," she said. To want more. To feel something again. He paused. The pen stopped moving. "It's human," he said. "You're allowed to want." The way he said it, slow, steady, with that voice that seemed to know her heartbeat, made something in her chest ache. When the session ended, neither moved right away. She reached for her bag, but he spoke first. "You've changed," he said quietly. "You seem lighter." She almost laughed. "You have that effect on people?" He smiled, but there was something behind it now. Something that made the air between them hum. She walked out into the hallway, but her reflection in the glass door caught her off guard. She looked alive. And that scared her more than anything. She told herself it was still therapy. That the flutter in her chest was just relief, that it meant she was finally getting better. But deep down, she knew better. When she walked into his office that day, the room felt smaller somehow. Or maybe it was her, maybe she was the one who'd filled it with too many things unspoken. He noticed. "You seem distracted." She laughed softly. "Maybe I'm just thinking too much." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "That's usually my line." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wanted to look away, but didn't. Instead, she met his gaze, and suddenly the air between them felt heavier, charged, alive. He said quietly, "You don't have to say everything out loud." She tilted her head. "What if I want to?" There was a pause, long enough for both of them to feel what they shouldn't. He set down his pen, breaking the moment. "That's where therapy ends," he said, voice steady. "And what starts after that?" she asked, before she could stop herself. He looked at her for a long time, too long. Then finally said, "Something we're not supposed to name." The rest of the session passed in fragments, short answers, quiet silences, glances that lingered too long. When it ended, she didn't stand right away. Neither did he. He finally said, "Take care of yourself this week." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "You too." Outside, the city felt louder than usual, like the world was trying to drown out whatever had just happened. But it was too late. The line had already been crossed. She didn't plan on crying that day. But the moment she sat down, the words just fell out, like something inside her had finally snapped. I don't know who I am anymore, she said, her voice breaking halfway through. I wake up next to a man who doesn't see me, and then I come here and… She stopped. She couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't move. Didn't interrupt. Just waited, like he always did, quietly, patiently, giving her the space to breathe. And somehow, that silence hurt more than anything. When she finally looked up, his expression was softer than she'd ever seen. Not professional. Not distant. Just human. It was too much. Too kind. Too close. Sometimes I think I only exist in this room, she said. He exhaled slowly, eyes still on hers. That's dangerous, he said quietly. Because one day, this room ends. She nodded, but her chest ached. I know. For a long time, neither spoke. The clock ticked behind them, steady, indifferent, cruel. He finally said, "You're searching for safety, not love." But she wasn't sure she believed him. Because what she felt didn't feel safe at all. When the session ended, she stayed seated. He stood up, unsure whether to open the door or sit back down. And for the first time, it felt like they were both trapped, not in the room, but in the silence between them. As she left, her reflection in the glass looked almost like a stranger, eyes swollen, but alive. And somewhere deep inside, she knew, something had broken today. Not between them, within her. She skipped her next session. She told herself it was for the best, that she needed to clear her head, to remember who she was before all of this. For a few days, she tried to pretend it didn't matter. She filled her calendar with meetings, dinners, noise. Anything to drown out the quiet. But no matter where she went, she carried that silence from his office with her, the kind that wrapped around her, heavy and invisible. At home, the distance between her and her husband felt even wider. They spoke, but it was all surface, bills, groceries, meaningless questions about the day. He asked once, "How's therapy going?" And for a second, she almost laughed. "It's over," she said. He just nodded, as if that meant the problem was solved. But it wasn't. If anything, the silence that followed felt sharper than before. She found herself scrolling through her phone at night, not looking for him, but ending up on articles about boundaries, transference, emotional dependency, words that sounded clinical, but felt painfully real. Every sentence seemed to describe her, though none dared to say what she was really afraid of. That she'd become addicted to being understood. One afternoon, while driving home, she passed near his office by accident, or maybe not. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, her pulse quickened. She told herself she wouldn't look. But she did. The building stood there exactly as it had, same window, same curtain, same quiet presence. She slowed down without realizing it. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow move inside, a shape that could have been him. It made her stomach twist, not from longing, but from recognition. He was still living in her head. Later that night, she dreamed of the room again. The clock ticking, the faint hum of the air conditioner, his voice saying her name, calm, measured, almost sacred. She woke up with tears on her pillow. It wasn't love. She knew that now. It was something lonelier, a mirror she didn't want to look into, because it showed her everything she'd been missing. The next morning, she sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes outside his building. She didn't plan it. She just ended up there. Her heart beat too fast, her hands restless in her lap. Then the door opened. He stepped outside, locking up for the day. The same gray coat, the same unhurried movement. He looked up, saw her car. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass and the drizzle. He didn't smile. Neither did she. But that look, calm, knowing, human, said everything words never could. He turned away first, disappearing down the street. She sat there long after he was gone, listening to the rain hit the windshield, each drop echoing louder than it should have. When she finally drove away, she whispered to herself, "I miss who I was when I was in that room." And deep down, she knew that was the real danger. Not him. Not what they'd shared. But the version of herself she'd built in his presence, the one who believed, just for an hour, that she could still be saved. She waited 3 weeks before going back. 3 weeks of silence, of unfinished thoughts, of pretending she didn't care. At first, she tried to fill the space he'd left, long walks, podcasts, meditation, even wine at night. Nothing worked. Everything just made the quiet louder. One morning, she caught her reflection in the mirror, pale, tired, with that same look she'd worn the day she first stepped into his office. That was the moment she realized she wasn't running from him. She was running from herself. So she made the call. Her voice shook when the receptionist answered, but she managed to say his name. Yes, I'd like to schedule another session. When she entered the familiar room, it felt both exactly the same and completely different. The clock still ticked. The light still fell across the same corner of the rug. But something inside her shifted, a mix of guilt, comfort, and something harder to name. He looked up when she walked in. No surprise. No anger. Just that same quiet calm. I wondered if you'd come back, he said. She sat down slowly. I wasn't sure if I should. He nodded, folding his hands. And why did you? She hesitated. Because I hate what I've become without this. He stayed silent for a long moment, eyes steady on hers. This isn't supposed to be about me, he said finally. I know, she whispered. But what if it is? Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. The truth wasn't about him, not really. It was about how she felt when he listened. How, for 1 hour a week, she remembered she was a person, not just a wife filling space in someone else's life. He looked down, exhaled. You're not the first to confuse being understood with being loved. She smiled sadly. Then why does it feel the same? The room fell silent. That kind of silence that speaks louder than anything else, filled with things neither of them could say. When she finally stood to leave, he didn't stop her. He just said quietly, you don't need this room to be seen. But as she closed the door behind her, she knew he was wrong. Because for better or worse, she'd already left a part of herself in there. And no matter how far she went, it wasn't coming back. She didn't go back the next week. But she didn't need to, something had already changed. For days, she caught herself thinking about their last conversation. Not his words, but the silence that followed them. The way he said, you don't need this room to be seen. And how, deep down, she hated that he might be right. She spent hours walking through the city, headphones in, no destination, just movement. The noise, the people, the chaos, all of it felt grounding in a way therapy never did. Because for the first time in months, she wasn't performing for anyone. One night, she stopped by a bookstore. She picked up a book about self-forgiveness and laughed quietly to herself. If someone had told her a year ago she'd be here, lost, guilty, and weirdly free, she wouldn't have believed it. At home, her husband was asleep on the couch, the TV still on. The sight didn't hurt anymore. It didn't comfort her either. It just was. She sat across from him, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching the flicker of the screen dance over his face. And for the first time, she didn't feel anger. She felt distance, clean, quiet, honest distance. Maybe that's what love becomes when it's over. Not hate. Not drama. Just stillness. The next morning, she opened her phone and started typing a message, his name in the contacts, her fingers trembling. She wanted to thank him. Not for what happened, but for what it showed her. That she was still capable of feeling. That she didn't need saving, just space to breathe. But she deleted the message before sending it. Some things, she realized, don't need to be said to be true. As she closed her phone, sunlight poured through the window, spilling across the table. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was close. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. She wasn't looking for him. She wasn't looking for anything, really. She'd stopped by a cafe near the park, the kind of quiet place where no one talks above a whisper, and time seems to move slower. The air smelled like coffee and rain, soft jazz humming in the background. When she looked up from her book, she froze. Across the room, 2 tables away, he was there. No notebook. No clock ticking between them. Just him, in a simple gray coat, talking to someone who smiled easily. For a moment, her breath caught. Not from longing, but from recognition, that strange ache of seeing someone who once held a piece of your story. He hadn't seen her yet. And in that second, she realized she didn't need him to. She watched the way he gestured as he spoke, calm and deliberate, just like before. Only now, she could see the distance clearly, how far she'd come from the woman who used to hang on every word he said. He turned, just slightly, and their eyes met. A flash of surprise, then warmth, gentle, fleeting. He gave the smallest nod, a silent acknowledgement. She returned it, just as quietly. No smile. No wave. No words. That was all it took. She finished her coffee, left a tip on the table, and walked out into the cool afternoon air. The city was alive, people crossing streets, laughter spilling from doorways, a dog barking somewhere down the block. For the first time, she didn't feel like a ghost moving through it. She felt present. Solid. Real. And as she walked away, she realized the story wasn't about what happened in that office, it was about what she'd finally found outside of it. Herself. I used to think healing was about fixing what's broken. Now I know it's about learning to live with the cracks. It's strange, when I look back on that time, I can't decide if I was falling apart or finally waking up. Maybe both. There are days when I still remember the smell of his office, coffee and paper and something faint, like cedar. The sound of the clock. The way the light hit the floor. The feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. People talk about affairs like they're just about desire, about doing something wrong. But that's not what this was. It wasn't passion. It wasn't rebellion. It was something smaller, a quiet hunger for warmth. For someone to look at me and not see a mistake, or a wife, or a patient. Just me. And yes, I crossed a line. I know that now. It's easy to justify things when you're lonely, to call them healing when they're really just escape. But at the same time, I can't hate myself for wanting to feel alive. Because that's what I was, alive, for the first time in years. After everything, I don't blame him. He wasn't perfect, but he was human. We both were, 2 people trying to help, and hurting each other in the process. Maybe that's what healing really is, learning how to forgive the people who tried, even if they failed. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about it. Not about me, exactly, but about that strange kind of connection that exists in the spaces we don't talk about. The way silence can hold more truth than words ever could. There's a version of me that never went to that office. A version that stayed numb, obedient, invisible. I don't know if she'd be happier, maybe she'd still have a perfect marriage, still play the part everyone expected. But she wouldn't be me. I've learned that love doesn't always make you good. Sometimes it just shows you where you're empty. And once you've seen that emptiness, you can't unsee it. Now, when I walk past that building, I don't look up. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I don't need to. That part of me is over. It happened. It changed me. And it's done. But sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a window, tired, older, but still here, I smile. Because I made it through something I thought would destroy me. And maybe that's what redemption looks like. Not erasing what you've done, just finally being able to live with it. It's strange how quietly life moves on. One day, you wake up and realize that the storm you thought would never end has already passed, the rain is gone, the air is clean, and you're still here. The world doesn't stop for heartbreak. It keeps spinning, with or without your permission. And maybe that's the mercy of it, it forces you to keep going, even when you think you can't. It's been months since that last time I saw him. I remember walking out of that cafe, feeling like I'd closed a door that had been open for far too long. At first, I thought I'd feel empty, like I'd lost something. But what I felt instead was space. Room to breathe. Room to exist again without waiting for someone else to understand me. I started taking small steps back into my own life, morning walks before the city wakes up, cooking dinner for myself even when I'm not hungry, sitting by the window just to watch the light change. It sounds insignificant, but it's not. Because those moments are mine. My husband and I still live together. The distance between us isn't as heavy now, maybe because I've stopped expecting him to fix what he doesn't understand. We talk, sometimes. Not about the past, not about what broke, but about the present, the plants on the balcony, the neighbor's dog, the way autumn makes the city feel softer. It's fragile, imperfect, real. And I think that's enough. Sometimes, I still catch myself wondering what he's doing, my therapist, I mean. Whether he ever thinks about me, or if I've just become another story he carries quietly, the way doctors carry old scars from their first mistakes. I don't blame him. He didn't save me. He wasn't supposed to. But he opened a door I didn't know existed, one that led straight to myself. I used to think love was the answer. That all the pain I carried would disappear the moment someone truly saw me. But now I know, the real peace doesn't come from being seen. It comes from learning to look at yourself without flinching. Sometimes, when it rains, I still think of that office. Not the walls or the clock or his voice, just the feeling of being brave enough to speak. That, I think, was the real therapy. So no, I don't regret what happened. I regret who I had to become to learn from it. But maybe that's how we grow, not cleanly, not gracefully, but honestly. And if you asked me who I am now, I'd tell you this. I'm someone who finally understands that pain isn't the enemy. It's the map that leads you back home. And after all this time, I think I've finally found my way there.